No, no. George, no save Davis. I don't need your saving. No. George, no save Dave. You didn't save me. I was fine on my own. I'm fine. Stop doing that. Listen, it's important for you to be nice to Pavo.
Mm.